Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight for the Watershed Wednesdays Webinar Series. Tonight's session is Reading the Forested Landscape with Tom Wessels. I'm Amanda Cavanius, Education and Outreach Coordinator at Greene County Soil and Water Conservation District. This webinar series is being offered as part of 2023's Schoharie Watershed Month, which is a month-long series of free community events that celebrate and raise awareness of the waterways that flow across the Schoharie Reservoir watershed, as well as the 315 square miles of land that feed them. In addition to this webinar series, we also have two more in-person events coming up, and those are a performance of Arm of the Sea Theater's Riparian Rhapsody, that's on Saturday at the Hunter Elementary School, and a volunteer tree planting on Sunday. For more information about each of those, you can reach out to me directly, or you can go ahead and follow our Facebook and Instagram accounts. All of these events are made possible by the Schoharie Watershed Stream Management Program, which was established in the mid-1990s to protect drinking water quality through the preservation of natural stream system stability and ecological integrity. This is a partnership between Greene County Soil and Water Conservation District and the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. The Schoharie Reservoir drainage basin includes portions of Greene, Schoharie, and Delaware counties and falls within the Catskill Park Blue Line. Natural disturbance in the Catskills has included wind, ice storms, and fire, and intensive human disturbances include agriculture, logging, and settlement. Today, the Schoharie Basin is largely forested, with 38% of land cover being deciduous forest, 13% being evergreen forest, and 33% classified as mixed. So tonight Tom will be reviewing and interpreting a collection of photos that have been taken throughout the watershed and the surrounding Catskill areas. As we go through these, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions about them. So again, just use that hand raise function and we will let you unmute. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tom Wessels. He is a terrestrial ecologist and professor emeritus at Antioch University, where he founded the master's degree program in conservation biology. He has conducted workshops on ecology and sustainability throughout the country for over 3 decades. He is the author of numerous books, including Reading the Forested Landscape, The Myth of Progress, Forest Forensics, and his latest publication, New England's Roadside Ecology, Explore 30 of the region's unique natural areas. So thank you so much for being with us, Tom.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And I think what I'll do is just start a little bit before we get into the photos to talk about the approach I use when I'm interpreting changes in forests as I'm walking through them. So I'm looking for either changes in forest structure, that would be the sizes or the spacing of trees. If I encounter a change in structure while I'm wandering along, then I know that the two adjacent forest areas have different disturbance histories. That something, if there's a section of forest with younger, denser trees, I know that was disturbed more recently, and then I start looking for the evidence to figure out what happened. I also look for changes in composition, the species of trees present. If I'm getting species that are eco-indicators, these are species that have very, very specific site requirements, then I know I've probably changed the substrate that I've been walking through and gone from one soil type to another, or maybe changed the topography, going from maybe a north slope to a south-facing slope. But if there's no change involving eco-indicators, then I'm again looking at disturbance history. So the images that we'll look at tonight, I'm sure that this will uncover some of the evidence I use when interpreting disturbance histories, and I think we can get right to it, Amanda. So you can just put up the first one and we'll go with that. All right, so what I'm seeing, all right, should we go with this one? Okay, so what I'm seeing here is a stone fence, and this is a really cool one because what you can see that as you go up sort of diagonally to the left, you can see that rocks were inserted, pretty big flat rocks, as stepping stones. So an individual could walk up that side of the fence, step over, and I'm guessing on the other side, there's a similar series of jutting out rocks like that to step on. And it looks like a lot of the rocks over to the left are getting somewhat small. If I'm seeing a stone fence that has a number of, let's say, fist-sized rocks in it, then it's a pretty good guess. I'm looking at an area that was once a crop field where the land was plowed annually to grow crops, because crop fields are the only sites where small stones rise out of the soil all on their own. So, for example, if any of you have vegetable gardens and you're on glacial till soils, you probably end up every year when you're in the spring turning over your garden, you're picking out rocks, and the next year you do the same thing, you pick out more rocks. You might think that, gee, they're reproducing or something, but that's not the case. It's only in sites that lack perennial root vegetation. So there's no roots of grasses or trees or shrubs, that freeze and thaw cycles slowly move rocks up to the surface. So that only happens in crop fields. So if you're getting fences that are basically abutting hay fields or pastures, they're going to be usually larger rocks, because you're not going to get those small rocks surfacing. Now, one way we could tell if this was truly a crop field, and it looks like it may be, is the wall in the foreground is going to the left, and then it turns and goes sort of straight back. And it looks to me like the ground on the right-hand side of that wall is higher than the ground on the left. I can't really see the ground on the left, but what I'm seeing in the foreground here is down quite a few feet from the top of the wall. And it looks like on the right-hand side, as you look back in that upper left-hand corner, that the ground's pretty close to the top of the wall. If that's the case, and there's a flat area right there, that would be really good indication that this is a crop field. Because farmers plowed across the contour line, pushing the plow furrow down slope, and every year the soil's migrating down. And as it gets near the bottom of that crop field, it builds up in what's called a bottom plow terrace. So on a site like this, the topography can slope down, and then it gets that bottom plow terrace and becomes very level. So I don't know who took this shot, but if the soil on the upper side of the wall was higher than on the bottom, that would be great to know, and that would mean it was a crop field for sure. And if the person isn't here that took it and can't answer that question, that's fine. We could, I guess, go on with the next one then.
Okay. Yeah, if the person is here and wants to drop, yeah, okay, I thought so. Beverly. Beverly in the chat says, I think the site of the steps is where the old foundation is.
I'm okay. Well, that could be. I'm not seeing a foundation here, but I just wonder if the land on the right-hand side of that wall is higher than the land on the left. That's all.
Okay. Got it. Beverly, if you would like to unmute, you can. Oh.
Sorry, I guess I can talk faster than I can. So this is the Vinegar Hill Wildlife Management Area that was a farm. I don't know when it was last used. And this section is indeed much higher on the upper
Okay.
right, as you're seeing. But what you can also see are some remains of mattress springs and farm equipment kind of tucked in there. I don't know if it was a foundation to a barn or the home, but it does slope down. And if you continued way to the left, actually there's a stream with multiple beaver lodges and dams, and the property itself is really lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. So that confirms that the ground is higher on the right-hand side there, that this was originally a crop field. Now it, basically, cropping really declined as we get in the middle 1800s, because then rail is linking up areas, and a lot of stuff now being grown out in the, Ohio Valley is coming into places like New York via rail. So at that point, usually that transitions areas to dairy farming, and then those crop fields often get converted to hay fields or pastures. So my guess is that this probably went to hay fields, probably sometime in the middle to later 1800s.
Right. I was fascinated by those stepping stones. I'd never seen such a thing before.
It's brilliant. It makes it real easy to now cross the wall. So,
Yeah, and you can't see them here, but there are also a number of old apple trees around the property.
Mhm.
And way to the right is a very interesting, I think the DEC actually put it in. There's a mass of cedars that at first I thought were a windbreak. They're all, each tree is covered by now well-rusted fencing. But I read on the description of this site that that was put in as a way to have whitetail rabbits return, that it was shelter for them. I'd never seen anything like that. It just looks like a maze to me. That would be a great place for kids to play.
mhm. All right, we probably ought to get on to the next slide. All right, so here we have another stone fence I'm seeing, and I'm only seeing larger rocks in it. And also there's a hardwood tree, it may be a maple, I'm not sure, that's right along that wall. And I can see that there's a lot of knobs on each of its two trunks, indicating that this tree was growing up when both sides of this wall were open agricultural land. So it had a lot of low limbs spreading out on both sides of the wall. So yeah, it indicates that it grew up along that wall when it was still open land. Now, I can't really say from the shot what the area was used for. It could have been crop field, it could have been hay field, it could have been pastures. There's just no way to tell from the image. But again, if this is glacial till soil that has some clays in it, if the surface of the ground, even if it's sloping, if it's smooth and even, if it's not irregular, like with pits and mounds and lumpiness, then that would be a good indication that was either crop field or hay field, because both had to be plowed. Hayfields plowed just a few times until they got rid of these pits and mounds, got it all leveled out, and then it was seeded to grow hay. So, but that would tell us if it was either hayfield or crop field. If there are pits and mounds still present in this site on the surface of the ground, then it was solely used for pasture. It was pastures that were just solely used for pastures, or just clear cut. If they had hardwood trees, they stump sprouted. That was the first forage for the livestock. And then once everything was killed, then and basically everything denuded, then the livestock was pulled out, and it was seeded with grass again to go into pasture. But the pillows and cradles or pits and mounds would remain because it wouldn't have been plowed at all. And I should mention, these are features that are the result of live trees being knocked over by wind or snow or ice loading. So when a live tree falls down, its roots rip up out of the ground, making what's called a tip up. And that tip up, when it turns up, creates a depression because it's brought up all that soil out of the ground. So there's what's called a pit or a depression. And then as that tip up, if the roots rot, the soil in that tip up slowly settles to make a mound. So you get what's called pit and mound topography, or pillow and cradle topography. And again, big features like that can be visible in our forest for up to about 1,000 years. So if they're missing, if the ground's smooth and even, it means it was plowed either as a crop field or a hay field.
So I actually took this one. I didn't want to switch it on you too quickly, but I added a second. It's just a little bit of a closer view of the wall. The
Yep.
land around it is fairly smooth. I don't really see too much variation in the topography.
All right. So now, were there many small fist-sized rocks in the wall? It looks like I'm starting to see some smaller ones near that big tree.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we're looking at least at crop field on one side of this stone fence. And or it could have been on both sides too, but at least one side was crop field due to those small rocks.
Great.
All right, so this is like an enclosure of some sort. It may be, I can't tell if it's excavated down in there. So it could be like a small barn or outbuilding foundation or something that doesn't look like a cellar hole of a house, but there's definitely, it's inscribed by stone walls. So definitely probably holding some sort of structure. in there. So I'd guess some sort of farm outbuilding, possibly a small barn, something like that. And again, just looking to the left up in there in that woodland, it looks like, again, the ground's pretty smooth and even. I'm not seeing a lot of surface irregularity. But if there's something else the person who took the shot was interested in knowing about, then they can mention that, I guess.
Hi, I actually took this shot. I was up in Wyndham on a DEP property, and I had the impression that it might have at one point been an agricultural property that was then acquired. And so, yeah, I was wondering if this was a home, building, somewhere that they kept, crops or food for storage. And I just thought it was pretty interesting. I like these old foundation type rocks formation.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it doesn't look like it's excavated enough to really be a cellar hole for a house. So I'm guessing probably barn or outbuilding of some sort, but you're right, probably related to the agricultural history of the site.
A question just popped up in the chat. Can a horseshoe shape like this predate colonial occupation?
Well, it's hard to say if it is horseshoe shaped. I'd have to see it from above. But if it was, then yeah, you might be looking at Native American stonework, because the sort of wall structures they made were usually short, and they weren't straight, and they didn't have right angles in them. They were curved. So but I can't tell from the shot if that back there is actually a curved back, or we just can't see the corners because of the way the shot was taken.
Now, I don't 100% remember, but I don't think there were a lot of hard, like, right angles.
Okay. So then it's possible it could be of Native American origin. What exactly it would have signified, I'm not sure. I mean, I know they had made chambers for monitoring solstices and equinoxes, and they had certainly stone structures for ritualistic sites and things. So, but I'm not sure what that might have been used for. So it's a possibility for sure. All right, so this definitely looks like, again, some sort of enclosed space. So this could be a cellar hole. It looks like in the foreground, certainly we're getting quite a bit of drop off. Or it could be, if it's pretty big, it could have been a barn with 2 bays. And obviously abandoned a good while ago, because a lot of trees have, grown in that back sort of excavation area. But if the person who took it could give us more info on the size of this, that would be, I guess, helpful.
That's me again. This is actually fairly large. I wouldn't really be able to guess like how many square feet, but it also seems to have multiple levels to it. Even beyond this far wall here, it kind of drops off into another kind of chamber, and it's right on a stream that's predominantly bedrock. So it's kind of interesting to come across.
Okay, well, I mean, I was gonna say definitely a barn, but when you say right on a stream, it could be a mill site too. It looks pretty big for that. So I guess my inkling would be probably a barn, which often had a number of bays, and so that would be my guess.
Thanks.
All right, so here, is this part of that last shot?
This is the same structure, yeah.
Yeah, boy, they did a really nice job. That's really well laid up stonework, and it looks like we might have a yellow birch nearby that has snaked its roots right over it and down into that excavation area. Unless well, now that looks like they're definitely coming down. So that means that at one point there must have been some sort of covering of soil or moss in there for that root system to snake down in there.
Yeah, I have a few from this one particular, so you can see this.
All right, so yeah, so here we have an interesting tree. We have a tree that got basically tipped by the wind. So the trunk that's going this way got tipped by the wind, and then its lowest branch turned back and grew out up like this. That's where the light was. It looks like this big tree over here on the left was probably shading it, so it was pushing out away from that. So it had been a young tree, wind tipped, and then turned about 90 degrees and started growing out at that angle up to get to where the light is. I should mention, trees are really aware of light. They have 3 times the amount of light sensors we have. They're way more aware of light than we are, actually, and really adjust their growing structures to maximize as much light as they can reach.
Thanks. We did have 2 questions in the chat just about where this is located. So I cheated a little bit. This is not in the Schoharie Basin. This is actually along a tributary that flows into the Rondout Reservoir, but it is DEP land, and it is open for recreational access.
All right, some more stonework. I can't tell if that is a road just on the other side of it or not. It looks, there's a level area right in there. And I can't make out if that's what that is. If that was a road, then this might just be embankment holding that up. If it's not, we could be looking at crop field again with a bottom plow terrace. That flat area could be the bottom plow terrace in there. But obviously this wall predates these trees being there. That it looks like it's a black birch on the right, definitely grew in on that wall. So whoever took the shot might be able to give us more information about the site.
So this is actually the same site as the last one,
Okay.
but it's just a few hundred feet downstream. So it's separate from that main structure, and seems to kind of be the standalone area.
So did it seem like just beyond it was a possible woods road or something? Did that occur to you?
I hadn't thought of that, but the way this is, the direction that this would be going in leads directly to the stream. So maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And here's just more impressive roots from that same zone.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that
You
is.
get it.
All right, so this is a great shot. So this is a yellow birch that nursed on a stump. So when eventually that stump's going to rot away and you'll have this stilted rooted tree. And we can get stilted rooted trees like this in one of 3 ways. One is they germinate on a stump and then their roots grow down around it, or the stump as they get down to the ground level. Or you can have a nurse log where the log is on the ground and the trees seed in on that log, and then they start growing their roots actually along the top of the log, tying those trees together in a line. So when the log rots away, you have this line of trees with their roots connecting them. And then another way you can get it is that when a live tree is blown over, it has its tip up, and then trees can seed into that tip up, and then the roots sort of radiate down through it like the delta of a river. And then when the roots rot away of that down tree, you get this sort of splayed root system. What's sort of unique about this is usually the only trees in the region that make good nurse stumps or nurse logs are white pine and spruce, because they have wood that rots slowly from the outside in. After about 25 to 30 years, they have shed their bark and they often get a good coating of moss on them. But this looks like there's this black coating on the wood of this stump, which would be charcoal mat fungus. And that usually only grows on beech or maple or elm. So that makes this really unusual, because those stumps usually don't last long enough to be a good nurse stump. But if whoever took this could confirm, or maybe not, whether that is black, the wood there is black, that would definitely be a maple, a beech, or an elm.
It was black.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's charcoal mat fungus. So in late stages of decay of trees like maple, beech, or elm, the wood looks like it's almost been worked with a wood gouge. It gets smooth and everything else, but it's black. And if you rub it, it won't darken your fingers at all the way charcoal will. So that's quite unique. I mean, it's very rare to see a maple, a beech, or an elm nurse stump like this. Really quite rare. Matter of fact, I don't know if I've ever seen one. So unique. All right, so here's another stilted rooted tree, and these roots are making me think that this might have been a tree that nursed along a tip up. As you can see, those roots are radiating out. So that would mean on one side of this, probably the side that we're on, if this was from a live tree fall in the tip up, there should be a depression, a pit, or a bit of a cradle on our side. So whoever took this, is there a pit or a cradle on one side of this root mass?
I think unfortunately that person is not here. And
Well,
it's not in the notes.
that would be my guess, because this is what a stilted root tree that grows up on a tip up looks like. Usually if they're on a stump, the roots are going out with a gap in the middle, a space in the middle. These are all just going right down. And another thing that's really beautiful about this shot, you can see a lot of these roots have grafted onto each other. So if you look closely, you'll see areas where the roots have really joined. And so, you know, any trees growing within about 10 feet of each other in the woods, generally underground, their roots are grafted together. And once those grafts form, energy, nutrients, whatever else can, you know, be passed back and forth between those trees. And this can even happen between hardwoods and conifers. I've seen hemlock root grafted onto yellow birch. And once those root grafts form, energy, nutrients going back and forth. But I'm pretty confident this is a stilted rooted tree that germinated up on a tip up. Boy, we're getting a lot of stilted rooted trees. This is another one. It looks like another yellow birch, possibly. I can't really see enough here to know exactly. My guess would be probably a nurse stump, because the trunk comes down and then it on the left-hand side sort of flares out a bit. That could have been a root that was turning out, and then once it got to the edge of the stump, went straight down like it's doing on the left. So my guess would be probably a nurse stump that this yellow birch nursed on. Well, we have yoga in the woods, I guess. No, we're getting this. We're really getting a lot of stilted rooted trees here. Now, this one, we have two of them here, and I can't tell the juxtaposition, but if they're connected, they could be part of an old nurse log. And that might be my guess, that these two trees, they look like they might be hemlocks, might have germinated on a nurse log. And if there were more in the line, you know, that would definitely confirm it. But that's what it looks like going on to me here, because it's certainly not from a nurse stump, and there's no tip up or anything like that. So I'm guessing this is evidence of the nurse log, and the log is long since decayed away. All right, so now this looks like we're getting more root stuff going on here, but I don't think this is like from a nurse log or a tip up or anything like that. I think what happened, I'm guessing this might be a maple. I think on the side facing us, there was a wound in there that got decay going in it, and the tree took you know, living tissue that normally form wood of a trunk and sprouted roots. So trees can do this. If they have, let's say, a hollow core of rotten material, they'll often sprout roots right into that to absorb the nutrients that are in there. And that's what I'm guessing happened here, is that there was a wound there, and the tree sprouted roots that grew on that side of the tree into that wound area. What's really intriguing about all these shots, I've never seen something like this before, but we had, I think, a series of 6 shots in a row with unusual root formations, root stilting. We got, I think, definitely nurse stumps, a nurse log, and on a tip up. And now we're getting these roots growing into a wound on the side of a tree. So that's really cool that they all came together. I don't know if, Amanda, you lined them up like that because they're all, you know, sort of root pictures, but it worked out very well.
Yeah, I did. So I kind of categorized them a bit. I started with stone walls and moved to roots, and now into these other.
Yeah, well, that was very nice, because it
Great.
sort of just displayed everything I had mentioned about root stilting at the start. All right, so this is most likely a lightning strike. Lightning, will, if it hits a tree, will, blow the bark off, creating a scar that goes up the tree. And it looks to me like this scar, as you're going up, is spiraling slightly to the left. So that would be somewhat unusual. Most of our trees have trunks that do spiral, but most of the spirals, as you're looking up, turn to the right. This one looks like it's slow, like very slightly going to the left. And I'd say only about, 2 or 3 out of every 100 trees spirals in this direction. I'd say probably 90% of our trees spiral to the right. Tree spiraling is a natural thing. It's part of what's called a plant's phyllotaxy. What it does is, as the trunk is spiraling, that means as it's growing up, the limbs start getting displaced a bit by the spiral, so they're not right above and below each other, which maximizes solar gain. So direction of spiral, genetically determined, whether it's right or left. But the intensity is environmentally determined. So this is not a very strong spiral at all. It tells us that this tree really grew up quickly, really elongating its trunk fast, almost like taking a spring and pulling on it, reducing the intensity of the spiral. But if you ever see trees that get hit by lightning that have very intense spiraling, that means that they're much older than you think they are, because they were very slow growing. They could have been canopy suppressed if they're on a windy ridgetop. They could be wind stunted. Any tree that can't really elongate its trunk quickly can get very pronounced spiraling. But if you're going to get a wound or a scar following the spiral in a trunk, it's always going to be lightning. So if whoever took this picture, if they can remember, did that wound actually look, as you're looking up, slightly keep turning to the left?
I don't remember, but I'll go back and look at it tonight.
Yeah, if it did, if it did, it's definitely a lightning strike. If there's no spiral there, it could have been caused by another tree hitting that and just running down the trunk. But take a look, because if it does have a spiral to it, then it was lightning. And again, it doesn't look like an intense spiral, so that tree grew up quite quickly, and really lengthened its trunk length very fast.
I think it was ash.
Yeah, it looks like ash from the bark down below. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, so here we have, it looks like maybe a blighted beech growing next to a hemlock. I don't doubt those two trees are root grafted. Trees being that close do root graft, and like I said, it's not that uncommon to find coniferous species root grafted onto hardwood species. So that would be my guess of what's probably going on there, unless there was something else in the shot that the person who took it was interested in.
No, that was it's impressive all on its own.
Okay, very good. All right, so now we have definitely a weight bent tree. It looks like it might be a cedar, but if you look at the image on the right, that's sort of a closer up of the base of the tree, you'll see its roots are on. It's the base of the trunk is on the left, and it comes up and it bends like this. Whenever you get a bend like that in a trunk, that is from weight. That tree was weighted down as a young tree, either by snow load or maybe another tree falling on it. And then 3 of the branches on that side took off to become the new main trunks. And then the energy was diverted away from the original trunk that was sort of going out at an angle like this, because it was in the shade and it wasn't in the tree's advantage to try to keep pumping energy there. So it reconfigured its energy going into these 3, which would have been probably very small branches at the time, to become the new upper vertical growth. All right, so here's now, this tree is more of a wind bent tree. So again, the bend is going like this. So if it's going like this, it's being wind tipped and going up. In this case, 2 of the lower branches took off to grow up to be the new upward trunks. So again, probably winds. And if we knew the direction that, the wind came out of like the right-hand side here and knocked the tree to the left, we knew the direction, we could possibly figure out the type of storm, because winds out of the west would be from thunderstorms. Out of the east, possibly from nor'easters or hurricanes. I mean, you're getting pretty far west over there in the Catskills, but I think you probably still would get some impact from possibly hurricanes that are, coming up the eastern side of the state of New York. So yeah, looking at whether the winds came out of east or west, you can sort of get a sense of the type of storm. All right, so definitely scratching here. My guess would be bear, because I can see like some nice clear scratch lines coming down. I haven't seen bear scratch, white birch or paper birch trees before, but they will scratch trees to leave scent marks and stuff. And it looks like also before this tree was scratched, it was hit by probably a yellow-bellied sapsucker. I think I see some sapsucker holes lined up there. And I should mention, paper birch is one of the sapsucker's 4 favorite foraging trees. The other 3 are hemlock, apple, and basswood. But if whoever took this shot, if they can tell me if those look like bear claw marks, that's what they look like to me.
That person is not here, but when they sent it with the note bear scratches ?
Yeah, I think
So,
it is. I've
yeah.
never seen them scratch a birch, but that would be my guess. All right, so this is a beech that has beech bark scale disease. If you look down the lower central part of the trunk, you'll see some little white dots. That is actually the scale insect. The white there is a waxy coating it coats itself in. This scale insect is an exotic species from Europe that got over here on a load of beech logs delivered to Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1880. And then this tree blight sort of spread out. I'm sure it got to this part of New York sometime after World War II. But in any case, the scale insect in its own right, not too big of a problem, but they tend to be very sedentary, and their population builds up on a tree. And eventually there's so many of them, they can compromise the bark and make micro fissures in it, which allows now a exotic Nectria fungus that they carry to move into the tree, which then starts infecting the tree and then starts breaking up the bark into larger fissures. So our native fungi can come in and start really producing a lot of white rot decay. In this case, this beech has little rounded knobs, so it has some resistance here, and it's trying to encapsulate the Nectria fungus in little rounded cankers. But generally, the sort of the strength of these trees diminishes through time, and eventually they do fail. It just takes a good while for that to happen. But this tree is showing some resistance, but eventually I think will succumb. All right, so now we have a hemlock with hemlock polypore. This is a Ganoderma type fungus that's host specific to hemlock. It only grows on dead, decaying hemlock trees. And it looks like we've had a pileated woodpecker working on this hemlock because there are ants in there, part of the probably hollowing out and the decaying of the tree. Once I found on one of these hemlock polypores this brilliant species of beetle that is black and red striped. And I'd never seen this insect before, and looked it up online and found out it was a pleasing fungus beetle. And it is host specific to this hemlock polypore. So now you have a host specific fungi only growing on hemlock and a host specific beetle only mating and feeding on that fungus, which is quite interesting because I've never seen anything like it. And I tried to figure out why the name of this beetle was pleasing, whether it's because they were just so pleasing to look at, or whether because they were, they're having an orgy on these polypores and they're pleasing each other. So I don't know where the name pleasing comes from, but it's probably one of those two. All right, so here's a pretty good scar in the trunk of what looks like an ash or a maple. And it's gotten some probably now fungal infection that's causing some cankerous growth, so that you can see that that callus that's trying to grow over is really now enlarged. And so cankers like this are just tumorous growth initiated by either a fungus or a bacteria or a virus, but in this case, most likely fungus, because there was already a wound there that got this going. But that's just not normal callus wood. That is definitely a canker forming around that old scar. All right, here's another canker, but this one just making sort of like a more of like a almost two fused cantaloupes or something. But again, a tumorous growth from either a fungal infection, bacterial infection, or viral infection. Okay, here's a great example of a really intense spiral. So I was talking about spiraling before, and I was mentioning most spirals turn to the right as they're going up. That's what this one is doing. This is really, really a tight spiral. So that means this tree did not elongate its trunk very fast at all. And my guess is it was probably an open grown tree growing all by itself in probably an old pasture, because open grown trees, like I said, trees are very aware of light, is they just grow their limbs right out as far as they can down low, and they don't elongate their trunks, so those trunks get really intense spirals, as we can see here. So my guess is a pasture tree didn't elongate its trunk, but grew a lot of low outward growing limbs, and because of that got this really, really nice intense spiral. All right, and again, that tree on the left there, I think that's a snag. It's got that pretty tight right-hand spiral as well. As you're looking up, the spiral's turning to the right, and that's pretty tight, again, for a tree. And I'm guessing this tree doesn't look like it was open grown. It looked like it grew up in a woodland, so it must have been canopy suppressed. And a tree like this, excuse me, based on its size, is probably at least twice as old as you would think it was based on its size, because it means it was very slow growing with that tight of a spiral. And even though it, might only be 1.5 foot in diameter, much, much older than a tree of that size would normally be. And here's another spiral again, but this one now is going left. So now we've gotten two left-hand spirals. And this is on probably a maple or a beech, because I'm seeing some charcoal mat fungus in the exposed wood. And most likely a lightning strike that took a major chunk of the tree away, but left probably one small limb on the right, which took off as the new major growth of the trunk. But again, I think another lightning strike in this case that caused that spiraling and exposed that wood that now has been hit by charcoal mat fungus. All right, so here we have a white pine that has been hit by the white pine weevil twice. White pine weevils are a native insect that lay their eggs on the very upper shoot of a white pine, but not any pine is going to do. They're only going to seek out young white pines, generally less than 15 years of age, growing in full sunlight, because they want a terminal shoot that's really thick, like as big in diameter as a finger, because that's going to be the forage for their young. So they lay their eggs on that terminal shoot, the eggs hatch out, the larvae drill in the terminal shoot, killing it, and then the tier of branches below that takes off and erupts into new upward growth. So this tree hit at least twice, once down low where it forked, and then up again on both of those trunks, where one just looks like forked two limbs, the other one went up with 4 or 5. All right, this is cool. So these are two beeches next to each other, and the limb of that left-hand beech grafted onto the trunk of the right-hand beech. And this is really not uncommon in beech. They have smooth bark that's not very thick. So originally that limb would have been rubbing against the trunk, rubbing through the bark until on both the branch and the bark until it grafted on. And that graft was there for a long time, because originally that graft would have been on the side of that trunk. Now it's sort of in the middle. So that happened when these trees were both quite young, and has since probably been impacted by a beech bark scale disease, but a really cool limb graft, and again, happened way long ago, and those were just little trees. All right, so there's a number of trees in here. These are all of a pretty dense young forest of trees, and a lot of them are weight bent, bending over like this, and you can see the bend is going, towards the right. The trees are bending towards the right. Most likely, this is from snow or ice loading from a winter wet, heavy snow or an ice storm that did this, bending these trees like that. All right, so here it looks like we're in a hemlock forest. We've got some down logs. I think the foreground looks like we're probably getting into, maybe a swamp setting, because it looks like it's pretty well moss covered. Whereas just to the left and up in the back a little bit, we're getting into an upland area where we don't have that moss coverage. So I'm guessing probably hemlock stand adjacent to a swamp that may have been a fen, because it looks like there's a lot of hemlock in that swamp. And if that had been, let's say, from a marsh, you probably wouldn't have hemlock there. Hemlock, if it's going to volunteer into a wetland like that, is usually coming in on a fen that has some peat underlayment. So that's what I'm guessing we're looking at here. And I don't know if whoever took the shot knows that, but if there was peat, if that is a fen with peat in it, that'd be really squishy to walk on out in there, in that moss area.
So this location is actually, they've found some of the oldest peat in the Catskills here. It's called the
Cool.
Emerald Bog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be it could have been from a bog, or it could have been from a fen. I can't tell by the vegetation, because hemlock could go into either what was previously bog or fen. But yeah, definitely peat there then.
The question in the chat says, what hike is this on? This is actually at the Mountaintop Arboretum, the Emerald Bog Trail.
And I should mention these down, if you can just go back a second, Amanda,
Mhm.
those down logs in there are really critical, because they form hummocks, and that's where any trees coming in are going to germinate on. And they can't really germinate in the mat of moss itself. It's too anoxic, not enough oxygen, but they can germinate on the moss on those logs. So that's really an important germination site for trees to move in there.
And I had also noticed that some of the trees in the background are all kind of leaning the same direction. Is that also most likely wet snow or ice? Or
It could be. I'd have to see if they're bent or they're just tipped, or I'd have to see it. I can't really quite make that out. So.
gotcha.
All right, so this looks like definitely a human excavated impoundment, a pond, maybe for livestock or something. It doesn't look like a natural sort of structure to me, just because it drops off so steeply on its sides in this one little area. So that would be my guess. It could have been like excavated to create a pond for livestock or something like that. But whoever took it, maybe if they have more information, that'd be good to hear.
This one I couldn't really figure out. It did look like it was human made, but it is within the floodplain of a small stream here, and you can see that the stream kind of in higher flows, I think, comes shooting through here. But I didn't know how it would have carved such a straight edge along that.
Yeah, I don't
side.
either. That's why, and it may be that, like, again, that this just gets fed during phases when there's a lot of water coming down and fills this up, and then holds water again, possibly for livestock, when if this was formerly a pasture. I mean, this looks like again another possible similar situation, because it doesn't look very big. It looks like it could have been excavated.
This one's pretty small, and it was more round. It looked more natural. I didn't get the full scope of it in here, but
Yeah, so I'm guessing again, probably excavated as a little impoundment of water for livestock. And this looks like it could have been a vernal pool. I know up here in Maine where I've been, it's been super dry. So I think most of our vernal pools have failed, but that definitely holds water at certain times of the year. And that would be my guess that that's probably a functional vernal pool. But if it was taken this spring, and if you're anywhere as near as dry there in the Catskills as we are here, that would be a one that just wasn't functional this year.
Would that kill off all the amphibian eggs?
If they didn't make it out, yes. I mean, they probably got to the tadpole stage or something like that. But then, if they weren't big enough to get to a mature enough size to exit the pool, yeah, they would have died.
Oh, wow.
All right, so here we have a beaver pond, and it looks like it's active. I'm looking at that dam in the left-hand shot, and it looks like the water level is right up to the top of it. If that's the case, this is an active beaver dam. The beavers are mudding that dam every night or even during the day, maintaining it. And I don't see any vegetation growing on the top. Usually after abandonment within a few years, you get, grasses and things like that growing on the top of the dam. I'm not seeing that at all. So I'm guessing this is probably an active beaver pond. You can see the flooding killed a lot of the trees that were growing there before it was turned into a pond. And if it's true that the water level is right at the top of that dam, it is active.
Yeah, it does go right up to the top there.
Yep. And are these pitch pines, whoever took the shot?
They are.
Yeah. So this is definitely a pitch pine barren that looks like it got subjected by fire that killed these trees. And generally they stump sprout, but it doesn't look like these guys stump sprouted at all. So it may have been the fire was quite recent, but whoever took the shot maybe knows more about it.
This was submitted by someone who isn't here, and that's actually located, I think they said around Sam's Point in where there, I think, has been fire within the past few years.
Yeah, so pitch pine generally is quite fire adapted, and even at young ages develops very thick bark to protect their cambial tissues from the heat of a fire. But they've got a couple strings on their bow, so if they do get heat killed below that zone, they had adventitious buds that can sprout out. There are only regional conifer that can stump sprout like a hardwood tree. So if you cut like a red oak or a red maple, they vigorously sprout up new trunks. Pitch pine can do this as well, and that's what's a little puzzling. I can't see any sprouting at the base, which would suggest that the fire had to be pretty darn recent, like the photos were taken within a year of the fire.
Someone, Michelle said that the fire may have been 2018 or 2019. I think it was around then. I'm not sure.
Then it could have been really intense at ground level and actually killed the trees, and they haven't been able to. They weren't able to stump sprout.
And that was actually the last of our photos.
Okay, well, that was a good set. We saw a lot of good diverse stuff there. I think we can just open up to general questions if people have any questions about anything they've encountered in the forest or some clarification on something I mentioned, anything like that.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I didn't think to take a photo of it, but there's this little patch of woods, or well, this little stand, I guess, of just like maple saplings, thousands of them, like small, like head height, and it's just dense maple saplings. I don't know why that would happen.
It's a bit unusual. I mean, I've seen that with like young gray birch or something like that, or where they can just spread seeds, en masse in sites that had bare soil, and they can come up really densely. I have to admit, I haven't seen that in maple, but I guess if you had a really good seed year and conditions were good for germination, they could do that. It's, I guess, not an impossibility. So it just means that was an open site that just got peppered with seeds, a few years before you encountered it. Maybe like 5 to 10 years before you encountered it.
Someone asked if they could post 2 photos for a question. I believe that should work. Does anyone know if you could put photos in the chat? I've never tried that before. But if that doesn't work, Joseph, I could make you a co-host if you wanted to share your screen.
Yeah, if you are the host, you can give me access.
Yeah, let me do that. I'm going to stop my share. And then where'd you go?
So my question goes back to the stone structures we were looking at earlier.
So you're co-host now.
And this one photo was taken in Jewett, which is just south of Wyndham. We were talking about that early structure that looked like it was a horseshoe shape.
Yeah.
And this one, it's harder to tell, but let me find the best example here. That's not it. It's this, you can't really see it from these photos because they're so close in, but this is an also a horseshoe shaped enclosure that's actually on a property. You can see a little bit here. It's circles around and it faces due, the opening is due south. It's on a direct north-south axis, the horseshoe. I've had people look at this, they tell me it's probably a sheep enclosure, but I'm skeptical about that.
Yeah,
What do you
well,
think?
again, if it doesn't have the corners, I'd be skeptical too. The very first image you showed was of a chamber, which most likely was a solstice or equinox chamber. That one there, yeah. So these chambers usually have the openings are facing either east or, southeast, east southeast, or east northeast, either monitoring an equinox sunrise or a winter solstice or a summer solstice sunrise, because those were important times for Native people for ritualistic activity and stuff. So that's what this looks like to me. Like, it looks like it's a solstice chamber. They were capped with large flat stones, like we can see here, and then earth was put over them to maintain the structure. So I think that certainly is most likely Native American.
Very cool. Yeah, and this is not far from that first shot that we saw of what looked like a horseshoe shaped.
Yeah, so
we're just south of Wyndham.
Yeah, so I don't know what those other structures would be, but again, the curving walls, small size, suggests not for agricultural purposes.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or photos to share? Unmute. Hearing none. Seeing none. So we wrap it up.
I guess everything is explained clearly enough then.
Yeah. I guess I did have a question about some of those weighted down trees. If like the ones in that one shot where they're all fairly young, will those correct, or will they get that bend eventually?
They probably won't. I mean, if they're going to correct, they usually will correct within a week or two. But if they don't correct, that means the bend was enough that that's the form they'll grow in, and then they will send up one or more vertical branches to become the new trunks. And it's interesting, there's trees I've seen. There's one that was tipped by the hurricane in 1938 in Pisgah State Park in southwestern New Hampshire. It was a red oak that got tipped by the wind to about I don't know, 30-degree angle, something like this. The trunk went out 12 feet, and then the lowest branch on the trunk grew up as the new main trunk. Today, that trunk growing up is about 30 inches in diameter and going up about 80 feet in height. and it's pitched out 12 feet out from the root system on this very acute angle. And it's just amazing to think, how is that tree supporting it? Why isn't the weight of that oak, because oaks are heavy, just slam that tree down to the ground? But like I was mentioning, trees are not only aware of light, they're really aware of gravity. And once that tree got tipped, it started restructuring its whole root structure to support it, restructuring its tension and compression wood. So they're just fine. They they get tipped as long as they get, branches to get up in the canopy and establish themselves, they'll be fine and they won't have any troubles.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
Before
very
folks-
much. Thank you for this. This is great. Thanks so
Good.
much.
Yeah,
Yes.
before folks start jumping off, I do want to mention that Tom will be joining us for an in-person walk on June 11th. So make sure you're on our email list to get notifications about that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom.
My
This was
pleasure.
really wonderful. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it is. It's much more fun for me. So,
Yeah. That's great.
all right. Well, bye-bye, Al.
Yep. Thanks all.
Thanks, Tom.
More than
Take
welcome.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.